like that. I know one thing we do a lot, Mom and Dad, especially with two people writing together, we have gotten in a little bit of jam before but it'll be slight things like, one of us may describe someone's hair a little differently, or one of them may describe their eyes a little. So we'll have to go back through and make sure that at the end and make sure that we've got it all synced together so that we don't have any variances. But one thing that I've kind of thought about is we kind of write with guideposts. It kind of reminds me of a sheet where you just put like a bullet list, and like sometimes we'll do that and we'll think, okay, we want this, and this to happen, but it's always flexible enough that, I mean, most of the time it changes. And when we start getting into the story and you realize, well, they just wouldn't do that, or that just wouldn't, or like you're saying, you think, I know in the Secret Song of the Ditch Lilies, there's one particular part that we thought, wow, well, what if all of these things come together at this moment? What if all these people show up together? What would happen? Yeah. And we thought, what would happen? And so
that's a good scene in the book. That really.
And we did not intend to put that in there. We were going to have them all getting together at a later date, and we thought, well, what if it did? That would be really interesting. So it is kind of neat but it's also kind of neat to have that spontaneity too, to just let your characters go. I know we've talked about this. Our characters become very real to us. Do you find that they become real people?
Yeah, you miss them when you're done.
You do.
You're missing them like they're real people in your life.
You really do. I remember one time driving down the road, and I looked over and I saw a Jeep Liberty, and in Stony Creek, Alabama, the main character Sydney drives a Jeep Liberty, and I told my husband, I said, Patrick, Sydney drives a Jeep. That's Sydney's Jeep. And he just looked at me like, are you out of your mind? The other night I was writing something and I was talking through the dialogue, and I guess I was using facial expressions because I was it's one of these things where two characters are getting into it with each other.
Yeah, and you move your face.
Yeah, and I was kind of saying it, and I didn't realize he was watching me, and he said, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm just testing this out to see how it would go. So,
yeah, I do.
Well, tell me some things that maybe projects that you would kind of like to work on that you haven't, or just, has there been anything that's intrigued you lately that you would think that you might want to work on?
Oh, you let me commit to something here?
Well, you don't have to do it generally. You don't have to commit. It can always be changed, right?
Yeah.
Until it comes out in print.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated with how maybe the unseen world is affecting our world. Like maybe the people who haven't been born yet, or the ones who have died, how their lives or their existence is intersecting with ours. And so I have several ideas for
which I think is very fascinating. Yeah, so the people watching this video will know that's a setup, because I kind of know what you're, and I'm excited to hear. Marnie has a fantastic book that's kind of waiting there in the oven, and so I really think it's a good one.
You're gonna get them all excited, and what if I can't write it?
Well, we didn't tell them too much about it. Now, you ought to tell everybody about. Do you want to tell everybody about your Uncertain Justice now? A little bit about. I know we really haven't planned on talking about, but she's also got a really good book that's coming out pretty soon, and it's about the last legal hanging in Georgia, which is really, it's a fascinating story, and it's a very in-depth story, and I think you really do a good job of capturing. You capture justice, you capture mercy, and the marriage of the two, kind of, and how it affects these people's lives.
Kind of a saints and sinners thing, that nobody's all black or white, that there's a little bit of, and perceptions, I think, too. It's the story was told so many different ways, whether you read the trial transcript or the New York Journal, New York Times, or the Atlanta Constitution, or the local papers. They all tell it differently, and even I found an old book by a coal miner who said he had witnessed it, and he tells it totally differently than anybody else. And
wow.
I've always believed that the truth, that a lot of people are not lying. They're telling it the way they see it. They're telling their version
of the truth.
And from their perspective. And it's sort of like the blind man and the elephant. One of them says it's a snake, or a fan, or a wall, or a tree. And which one is it? And I think the truth is somewhere in a composite of all those. So with an Uncertain Justice, I tried to bring every perspective in so that nobody's lying.
It's
but
just,
it's just the way they're seeing it from their own
and
angle.
the truth becomes very relative.
Yeah, and I kind of leave it to the reader to decide whether they think justice was served or not.
Oh, I think it's very, very good. I'm excited about it coming out.
Oh, thanks.
And I also like the way that you bring in history. I know one thing that I've been very impressed about with your writing is that most of the characters, well, maybe all of them, they have all, right, been kind of sparked by, at least the majority of them,
A lot of them
been
have been.
sparked by real life people.
Yeah.
And I think that adds a whole other dimension of its own. I mean, it gives an authenticity there. I know one thing about Living in High Cotton is it was inspired by the life of my great-grandmother, and you're talking about reading the transcripts. I remember when we wrote the part at the end, and I hate to say too much if people haven't read it, I mean, anyway, but there is a part where a murder takes place, and I went back to the old courthouse.
Oh.
And a lot of those records had been burned, and I tried to find the transcripts from the court case, and I promise you, it seems like every municipal building in Alabama has burned at one point in time. So I couldn't find that, but I was able to go to I went to the newspaper, and they do have a newspaper article that was written up about the murder. And it was on a transcript, but it was over to the edge, and I couldn't see it. And so it was so old that they keep them in this book, but the article was so old that they wouldn't let me put it on a copy machine.
Oh.
So I had to go into the back and handwrite it, you know. And it was the first time that I kind of realized, wow, that story really took place and it was real, and it just kind of brought it all home to me that, okay, we're writing about
something that's real.
Something that's real. And mine is largely, I mean, we did fill in a whole lot of gaps, but it is neat, and I think it rings true because most of it is true, and I think that's the way yours is too. There's just something that you capture, and it just shows you that we're all connected. And it makes you feel close to your relatives, even though...
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I know them when I'm done with it. Yeah.
And it'll be interesting someday on the other side to see if your perception was really... If they're all smiling and happy, we'll know we did well. If they look really upset, then we'll think, oh, maybe we shouldn't have written that about...
You know, I hesitate to tell this, but since you brought it up, there's this one event that happened as I was writing An Uncertain Justice. And it convinced me that my ancestors are sitting over my shoulder reading what I'm writing sometimes. Because there's this one scene in there that I thought was funny because my grandfather's family were all Union. And my dad had read where my grandmother's great-grandfather was a Confederate deserter after Shiloh.
Oh, okay.
And so I made a kind of a cute little scene with the Confederate and the Union thing out of it. Well, not even, and I didn't tell anybody. Nobody has seen this scene but me. I've written it, okay? And it's one of my favorites. I wasn't ever going to cut this thing, okay? And then my mother shows up, and she hands me this purple envelope, and it has the enlistment papers for this grandfather in the Union, not the Confederacy, with his honorable discharge papers. It's as if he's like, you do not make me a Confederate, and you do not make me a deserter. She didn't know I had included it or anything.
Boy, isn't that something? So it does make you realize, he was like, you can put me down in your book, but I am not a Confederate and I am not a deserter. That's great. I like that. Yeah. So it does make you realize that we do have a little bit of an ownership to that. Yeah. Well, that's been neat. We have to talk more often.
Yeah.
I don't know how long we wanted to keep.
That's probably good.
Austin? You can click it now.
So,